Brian,
Weatherman,
how you doing?
good. How you doing, man?
Good. We've been talking about, going live for a while. It's nice to, I think it's the first time I've gotten to talk to you face to face, so it's great to meet you now.
Yeah, I know. It's like we're finally getting smart as creators. Instead of you and I talking like for 2 hours on the phone about like technical analysis and everything, it's like let's just go live and everybody, you know.
Absolutely. I heard you were talking about your Bitcoin estimates or what you're thinking. Where's your mindset with that?
Yeah. I mean, I still think that there's going to be some people taking profit in early January. I mean, I have some friends that are whales. I'm a shrimp, and I have friends that are whales, and they're like, yeah, I've already made way too much money in crypto this year. I'm selling in early January. And of course, for people who don't know, like, I mean, so yeah, I'm 42. I've probably filed more tax returns than most people on here, but what you tend to try to do is push your taxes off to the next year for as long as you can. And it's people say, oh, well, why does it matter if you're going to pay this year or next year? Well, because next year might be a bad year, or I mean, there's just a lot of reasons. You always defer liabilities and
Mm-hmm.
increase. So I think that's likely some early selling pressure in January, but I think that we'll recover back into a pretty stable pattern by the end of January. Is sort of my thoughts. I don't know that we'll be back in a full on bull run, but I think that we could be like in the mid 50s, mid to high 50s by the end of January. What about
Yeah.
you?
So I've been kind of torn about that because the whole tax discussion is a really reasonable argument. I can see it, and so I went back and I was looking at the last 3 years and what Bitcoin did, and there's always like this period of time where you do see these sell-offs. Maybe it's mid-December, maybe it's around the end of November. But what I've noticed is most Januaries are bullish,
Hmm.
and so it's kind of I'm kind of torn in terms of like what exactly will happen. Of course, we're speculating here, putting our thoughts out there. um, but I think it's going to be very temporary. Like if there is any sort of sell off, I think it's going to happen rather rapidly. And I know that a lot of whales also like to push their taxes off, do file extensions and stuff. So I mean, that's kind of where my mindset is at. I think we're going to push up in January. But you know how last year we had the really strong push was around February, March timeframe, and then April, May, the market dropped. I'm thinking the market's going to shift to the left 1 month. So I'm thinking like January, February is pretty decent. Are we going to break our all-time highs? Who knows? I mean, we never know. But I do think that a lot of people are going to get trapped into positions if it does turn bullish those first months, and they're going to experience their April, May. Instead, it's going to be March and April going into 2022. That's kind of where my mindset's at. I see that whole scenario playing out. And of course, we're speculating, so that's just
Yeah,
kind of where my mind's at. So,
that's a good disclaimer for anyone listening. I mean, we're speculating, especially that far out. That's one of the things I really appreciate about Crypto Weatherman is he's not trying to make predictions for like the next 3 years. He's like, hey, this is what the TA says about the next like few days, week or two, rather than
mm-hmm.
just try to make something up about like next summer when we know that there's tons of macro variables like the SEC and
Oh yeah,
inflation and
I did a series of trying to estimate the crypto market cap out 10 years. And I mean, there's a big disclaimer on there. I mean, there are so many variables that could change that between now and 2031. I mean, we could go into next year and you have 10 countries that ban it that are first world countries, and it's going to completely wreck that estimate. But it's fun to kind of look at those numbers as to what it could be. I was comparing it to the adoption rate of cell phones and internet because in my mind I was thinking, what is something that required global adoption to be successful? And those were kind of two answers. So I looked at their rate of growth over time and applied it to the market cap. I got a little bit of heat from a few people, but I mean, it's a fun project. So but yeah, we're always when we do TA, like I'm always looking at a short term. Like it's easier to kind of forecast what's going to happen tomorrow, vice next Monday.
mm-hmm.
In my mind. So
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of gained a new appreciation for TA watching some of your videos and learning some of your stuff. I feel like I've always had like an instinct for those indicators. I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? If those indicators are when the market's overheated, or it's kind of makes sense that you could kind of sense it. But it's cool to actually put it into like a science
mm-hmm.
rather. the feeling.
Yeah, I see it. I see on TikTok, because TA, I see it's kind of growing on the page and stuff. But I think one of the biggest mistakes is one over reliance on one or two indicators. I mean, we get false reads out of a lot of these, and even I have a handful of tools that I like, but the other big mistake is if you do have a bad call, like owning it. I mean, and that is a part of trading. I mean, you see some of these traders like, oh, I just had 25 correct calls and I'm a millionaire right now, and that's not the way trading. I mean, I had trades with my beloved HBAR and I watched it go straight down. It's just a part of it. The whole point though is to use these tools to drive the probability up to be successful, and then having risk mitigating strategies or averaging down strategies going into those. I think that's what kind of separates the boys from the men
Mm.
when it comes into TA and women from the girls. Sorry, I'm not trying to be sexist there at all, but
Yeah,
you get the
no,
point.
that's a good point that people should. I mean, because the market kind of is crabbing right now, going sideways, and there's mixed signals everywhere you look. I mean, it's really a good question for people to be asking themselves right now. Like, would you be happy in a best case and a worst case scenario? I mean, if you're 19 years old and you just want to bet the farm and be like, hey, I'm YOLOing, and if I get wrecked, I'll just go work at McDonald's and make my money back. That's fine too. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're not in that position, it's a good idea to have the both extremes in your mind and try to put yourself in a position where you would be happy with each outcome. I mean, that's the whole idea of dollar cost averaging. Dollar cost averaging, the definition is that you don't have all of your money in all at the same time, or else how could you dollar cost average? You would not have money for the next month's
Right.
contribution. So, and I mean, I think I'm definitely in that position right now that it's like I never buy call options because you almost always get wrecked on call options. But I did buy a bunch of call options for Bitcoin at various time frames because my thinking was I don't want to be all in on Bitcoin right now, but I want to have that cheap insurance that says that if I'm wrong and it does go to 350K, like in May or March or something,
Mm-hmm.
then I'll make a ton of money. And if it doesn't do that, which is what I think is 99% likely it won't, then I only lost a small bit. So it's kind of formulating your own trade strategy of like what do I want to, what can I risk and what am I willing to do.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes I see is, there are tons of creators and we all have like our own favorites. I mean, you and I diverge. I know you really like Fantom. I'm not a big fan. I like HBAR. I know you're kind of middle ground with that one. But regardless, when people go into their investments, they should be, if they're trading or they're investing, they should have their own conviction in it. If I have a trade that goes south, well, I don't really care because I was trading something that I believed in and it'll come back later and I go
Mm,
to sleep just fine. But I see it in the comments like, oh, Floki Inu. I'm seeing some of it here in the chat right now. Some of these random, shit coins that people are going to put some money into it and then they're going to lose sleep because they're nervous the whole time. And so I think it's so important. I also see over diversification as a constant issue. I saw one person, they had 139 cryptos in their portfolio, and I'm like, how do you mentally process
mm.
that much information and look at all the charts? But having your high conviction beliefs, even if the market goes down, you'll still go to sleep at night saying, "No, it'll come back later." Um, but that's I think those are some of the biggest problems that I see with new investors coming into the crypto space is over diversification and buying things that they don't necessarily believe in. Do
Mm.
you see the same for yours?
It's interesting. One of my stock market mentors, used to say diversification is diversification. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
interesting. I mean, so I do have a thought on that, and it's hard for me to latch on to something that I would call high conviction, like HBAR, only because the industry is so new and so young. I almost think, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this, but I almost think that scaling up to I don't want to say the size of HBAR, but at least the infrastructure and the partnerships and it's kind of bloated in that it's a little rigid already. Like the bigger you get, the more partners you have, the more people you have on your board, it creates an inertia or sort of a mass that is harder to shift around. I still think that we're early enough in this technology that I like projects that are very light and flexible and can shift easily. And that's actually one of the things that I like about Fantom compared to HBAR. I mean, I know that Fantom is an HBAR ripoff and they ripped the technology off, and I know that it's not, but it's almost kind of like the scrappy new kid on the block that just can kind of adapt. So that's what I'm afraid of. We're not ready for like the behemoths, the
Yeah.
massive, have already kind of established their vision and their that's my only concern with cryptos that have tons of partnerships with big, companies like HBAR. I'm like, you know, so anyway.
No, no, that's a very valid argument. I mean, I was mentioning earlier, like only 3.9% roughly of the population is even into crypto. And when you compare it again to like the cell phones and the internet that I was talking about earlier, I mean, they had successive years where they saw 10%, 15%, 20% growth. And of course, like you and I are old enough. We kind of remember the first cell phones. It was the adaptable players from the get go. I mean, we don't see Yahoo was not adaptable. AOL was not adaptable. And what happened? They ended up dying off. And they were touted as really like they were going to lead the charge going into the next 10 years, and they didn't. So I mean, there's a very valid argument having that flexibility in the market. I think one thing's going to be really tough is like in 2 or 3 years, like, are we going to recognize who that next Google is or who the next AT&T or Verizon is going to be in the crypto world? I have a feeling there's going to be some contention maybe mid next year or beginning of 2023 as to who those are. Whether Fantom was the adaptable one or HBAR was the behemoth that did lead the charge. Time will only tell. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's a
I mean,
fun debate.
that's a great argument for keeping moon bags, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if you're, this was a big mistake I made in the beginning of 2021, so beginning of this year, and I would caution people against this mistake. Don't ever exit trades completely and take all your profit and move on. I mean, if you're up 20, 30, 50, 70% on a trade and you think, oh, I'm just going to leave this behind, just leave a few $100 in there, because we're so early in crypto, and these cryptos are so tiny, still market cap. Most of them are, if you're looking at something under like $5 billion market cap, if that ends up being the next Amazon, you are so early, you don't want to be completely out.
Yeah, I so true. What are you looking at? Like, what besides Phantom, what else are you looking? Are you getting pretty excited about for 2022? For me, I've been really moving, focusing on cryptos less than about $5 or $6 billion because I want that runway ahead of me. So for me, it's besides HBAR, Tezos has moved up, XDC has moved up. Theta's moved up on my list. My portfolio compared to what it was in 2020 when I first set out, it's very different. So, what are you kind of looking at this year and why?
You know, that's a great question. I mean, right now I'm sort of interested in some of the layer ones that I think have a lot of potential but haven't run as much yet. I mean, there is such a massive market cap differential between the layer ones that have run and the layer ones that haven't. Like I'm pulling up Solana right now at 50 billion market cap, and then you have some other ones. I mean, Avalanche is still half the market cap of Solana. And if you go further down the list, I mean, you have some of these that are doing really interesting things that still just have not run at all. And I think there's going to be a lot more in the battle of the layer ones than we realize. Like, I think people are basically now, they're too short sighted. They're thinking, like, is it going to be Solana, Avalanche, or Ethereum? And they're just like listing 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever. There's probably a layer one that's just getting going right now that's going to be better than all of them. And that's how
Mm-hmm.
early we are. And I mean, people keep asking about Cherry Network on here. Cherry Network is
Yeah.
very tiny, guys. It's very risky. So please don't take me as saying that one is like, I'm recommending it. I'm not recommending it, but it is an example. It is an example of a new layer one that we just don't know what's going to happen and where it can go. And so that's kind of what I'm studying right now is just the layer ones. And then of course, writing the narratives. I think that was one of the mistakes that a lot of us like high conviction people had was we're not going to touch meme coins. We're not going to touch any of that stuff because it's, I know you didn't do that. You did TA on some of the meme coins and everything, but Also, just trying to keep an eye on what's the next narrative. These narratives kind of come in this trend where they like start off and everybody's in denial in the beginning and they're like, this will never do anything. And then there's like this period of acceptance where it's like, okay, fine, the metaverse isn't going away. And then the backside of the adoption curve is where like everybody calls themselves a metaverse and 50,000 metaverse coins are launching, but they're all garbage and they're all just too
Yeah,
late. So what's the
yeah.
next narrative for 2022?
I've been thinking a lot about because there was a big push for this Web 3.0, and I sat down and I was thinking about it for a while, and the first thing that came to my mind is what's the incentive for current like Web 2.0 platforms to transition over to a Web 3.0? And in my mind, there isn't much incentive at all. In fact, it's kind of for them from a monetary revenue stream type of mindset, it's not there. And so I really think that a lot of the Web 3.0 related projects have been kind of like overinflated. And again, this is my opinion. Um, I think we're going to have some form of catalyst to get us there. We've heard about like the cyber scares and the data collection, PII, that type of stuff. But if there's some sort of catalyst, and I don't want to bring this back up, maybe it's a black swan event, who knows? But um, I think the first things that they're really going to think about is scalability and security, with a predominance on cybersecurity. Because the last thing they want to do is launch their platform or a new platform on Web 3.0, and it's basically unsafe or unguarded. So I've been really focused on the cybersecurity aspects. Like the quant stamp is probably my top choice out of all of those. And then in terms of like the scalability, like these are low cap alts, of course, but Parsec is kind of like that bridge to bring them over. They're going to be, need those developers that have that knowledge to close that gap. So I think those are the two that I'm focusing more on rather than the decentralized aspect of getting to Web 3.0.
Mm,
So, but
that's really
and I wanted one last thing when you were talking about Solana and these other competitors. I think some people get too attached to their project without the mindset that there could be two top contenders. I mean, if you go to a gas station, what's across the street? Another gas station, they're competitors. What's across from Walmart, Target, The same thing's going to happen in crypto. There's not going to be one winner. There's going to be a couple that float up to the top. So, sorry, you were going to say?
Oh no, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, about the incentive to move to Web3. I mean, in my mind, the incentive would be people who are sick of being censored and who just kind of
Mm-hmm.
want to do their own thing. But even in that environment, it's not truly decentralized because somebody has to make sure that there's no illegal activities going on. Somebody has to make sure that the system's up and running. So yeah, there's really no um, true decentralization in that regard.
Yeah, I know. I've been seeing a lot of like, because I do believe that the transition will happen. I also know that there's like a really like a huge gap in knowledge, in blockchain in general. Because I mean, I see some of the bonuses that they're handing out to people with blockchain experience. I mean, I saw one, forget which company, but it was like $180,000 bonus if they had like a background in blockchain engineering and stuff like that. And so that's very indicative that I I had someone comment that I say indicative a lot, and they're going to do a drinking game every time I said indicative. They're going to take a shot. But if you see bonuses like that, it's absolutely progression, but that it's going to take time to get enough people to keep a system like that up and running. So I didn't personally, I know Jack Dorsey, he put out, he got your 2022 glasses. He's talked about it being ran by VCs, and maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong, but I mean the fact is money like that is what will make it a reality in the future. So whether we like
Mm.
it or not, so
That's kind of the ugly side of crypto that nobody wants to talk about, that the VCs get in early and then when all the coins unlock later, they're selling onto the retail investors. It's really, you cannot have decentralization in technology, right? Like you and I could have decentralizations on our farmland if we want to some degree. I mean, we still would need some outside resources, but as soon as you have technology, you need internet service providers. Now it's your turn for the class. You need internet service providers. You need a lot of like centralized. Thanks, guys. You need a lot of centralized infrastructure and oversight. And I think we already all know that about Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin requires two things that are very centralized. It requires electricity and it requires network connection. Like, guess who
Hmm.
controls those things? Big corporations and the government. Like, that's
Yeah.
just the way it is.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. When I interviewed Lehman Baird, he said pretty much the same things. It's constantly touted as this like super decentralized platform, but before the shift from China, most of the miners were there in China, overseen by the Chinese government. Of course, it's not 100%, but it was a vast majority. It was like, is it really as decentralized as you think it is? And I was also looking up like the process if you want to make a change to the Bitcoin coding. It's down to about, I think it was 12 people that have a say in terms of changing the code or the language. And it like, is that even technically? And granted, we'd like to believe that these individuals have the best intentions, but is that truly decentralized if there's 12 people that can really approve or disapprove changes to the code? I think it gets overinflated, and I think it's because it has such a big community around it that just kind of repeats this statement, decentralized, decentralized, without much like backing behind the words. I guess you could say
Hmm.
that's my initial reaction to it.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a sweet spot or a happy medium where it's kind of like something like Wikipedia or something where, yes, it's hosted centrally, but it's still kind of controlled by the people to some degree. Hopefully, our ridiculous governments will let that happen and won't just totally try to kill it and keep the greed and keep everything for themselves. Um,
Yeah.
so, like, what's your professional TA opinion on like? See, I have my Brian Ross prediction for January on my new YouTube channel here, but like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing, so I'm not a TA guy. But what is the TA telling you right now for like the big players like Bitcoin, Ethereum, just like the general market? If you're open to talking about that for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I've been pushing pretty hard for the last. So I got the November drop, I got that one, and I've been pushing a narrative probably about for 4 or 5 weeks to accumulate or average down. Of course, everything's a percent chance of happening, but because I believe that January is going to be bullish, we're going to see what I think is going to be one final leg up towards the end of, it'll start in January. We may reach a peak somewhere towards the middle or end of January and then start to ebb back down in February. And as I said, March and April, I think will be rather bearish. But I mean, I'm looking at the weekly chart. Let me flip my phone. The weekly chart, a lot of our faster moving indicators have already came down into these oversold territories. And here, even on the MACD, a lot of people say, oh, it's a lagging indicator. But I mean, what is this? Green, red, green, red. It's a pattern. Okay, so some of your best algorithms, they do pattern recognition. And so, what's the next stage after this? Another cycle of green. So, that's indicative of another, couple weeks where we do have bullish activity. This is somewhat of like an Elliott wave, but I do foresee another push up, but I think that's going to be the last one, particularly considering the macro environment. And just looking at the daily time frames, and this is really important, one of the biggest mistakes is sticking to one time frame. You want to utilize at least two to get a confirmation of what you're seeing. And again, here on the daily, I see our indicators have came all the way down, but our price is relatively flat across the board. So that's another big sign to me for bullish activity going into January. Of course, we could have those sell-offs, with people doing taxes and stuff. But I think it'll be really temporary considering the overall market. I mean, it's one piece in the puzzle, but I think it looks pretty good. So.
So you're saying that there'd be one more leg up in like the early spring, and then uh, is that right?
Uh, yeah, I think January and February is going to be bullish, and then
Mm-hmm.
March and April will be bearish.
And are you interested in projecting out further than that? Like, are we going to have a the typical three-year bear market, or
Not on a recorded line. um, you know, yeah, I do think that there is going to be a long-term pullback, and I think it's going to be particularly when we start to see some of these blanket regulations that unintentionally hurt a lot of projects. But it'll get rid of a lot of the scams and the shit coins and stuff like that. Like it's really necessary for us to have actually a deep bear market as much as people don't want it. I compare it to the cannabis industry. So when the cannabis industry was first going along, You had all these pop-up companies that had the new cannabis product that was going to change your life. And what they were doing is they would IPO and then they would essentially dump on the buyers and stuff. I mean, it was a huge problem for a while. And the reason they got away with it was because of the lack of regulation. But as people started getting into the justice system, those laws became more and more active. You had inspectors going out to inspect the oil extracting machines instead of having blowups, and it became a very profitable area. It took a hit for about a year or so, but it ended up doing 3x over the next 2 or 3 years. So it's very bullish. But I think a bear market is actually very essential. But at the same time, I also don't think Bitcoin's going to have major drops because the last thing that, one, the miners have a large control over, the minimum price because they have to have a certain profit out of the mining that they do. But part two of it, you also have these institutions that are trying to get, we already have the futures ETF, but we want the spot ETF as well. But the last thing that they ever want to do is say, hey, sorry, your portfolio just took an 85% hit. Like, I don't see those days coming along anymore. But a lot of the alts, when the bear market comes, I do think it'll be absolutely brutal. But speculating, I think that'll be, summertime, fall time,
Mm-hmm.
where that'll come along.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought to wonder how the regulations are going to impact the industry and if the larger ones like HBAR are prepared for that, which I have not looked into specifically. But you'd have to imagine when a crypto project gets to that size, they have somebody who's starting to roll the ball on compliance and figuring out what that looks like. I mean, of course, with the whole XRP lawsuit, we don't even know yet. There's not even a precedent on what to even do.
Yeah. And don't underestimate how long the government can drag their feet on that case. I mean, there's a lot of speculation. It's going to be over in October and then November. They will take their sweet time. There's no reason for them to close that. They don't have an incentive to close it. They don't care. So they'll investigate it as long as they want. So I hear my family crawling back into the house, so I got to go and get some lunch for the kids. But hey, it was really good to chat with you, Brian.
Yeah, nice to finally talk to you. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Let's do this again when I don't have interruptions. So,
I know I gotta go in a minute too. So yeah, we're in the same boat.
all right. Take care, Brian. See ya.